The League of Women Voters of Cupertino-Sunnyvale presents Pros and Cons on Ballot Measures, live from the Cupertino Community Hall. And now for tonight's moderator, Michael Lusk.
Hello. If I may have your attention, we're now going to start the ballot measure presentation tonight. I'm Elaine Manley from the League of Women Voters. I'm the president of the Cupertino-Sunnyvale League, and thank you for staying with us tonight. Hopefully you enjoyed the candidate forum. We thought it was quite informative. I want to do a very quick explanation of the League, if I may. We are about 98 years old, and we were founded around the time of the 19th Amendment became law for the women to get the right to vote. Our membership is open to men and to women, so tonight you get to hear from one of our male members. So I didn't want to surprise you, because some people got surprised. They didn't know guys could join, and they can. Now, after 98 years, it's kind of hard to change your name. So we are still the League of Women Voters, but guys are great. We like them too. So if you're interested in learning more about us, you can find out more at lwvcs.org or talk with one of the League members afterwards. Our purpose is to help educate voters. And as you heard earlier, we do not support nor oppose political parties nor candidates, but we do take a look at different measures, we study the issues, we develop a position, and we sometimes take positions. That would be called our advocacy. So we have two different branches of the League. One is education, one is action and advocacy. Tonight is education. We will not tell you how to vote. However, you're going to see an interesting thing. The League has actually come out and signed the ballot. And as we explain any ballot measure, we will state who has signed the ballot and who is in favor and who is against. So you will see the League's name on some of these propositions. But I wanted to make that clear because sometimes people get confused. So we're not trying to tell you how to vote. We're trying to educate you and tell you what's on your ballot. All right? Very good. So I'm going to turn this over to Michael Lusk. He is our Voter Service Director for the League of Women Voters for Cupertino-Sunnyvale. Michael, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Okay, just make sure I have the controls going right here. Okay, so there are 6 propositions on the ballot. There are 5 state propositions and 1 Bay Area regional proposition. I'm going to start with the state. Sometimes it's easier to follow if you have a voter's guide, or we have copies of the League of Women or Easer Voter Guide out in the lobby there if you want to pick one up. There are 5 state propositions. All 5 of them were put on the ballot by the state legislature. There are no voter initiatives on the ballot this election. 4 of the 5 are what are known as legislatively referred constitutional amendments. That means they are proposals by the legislature to amend the Constitution. As such, they passed by a 2/3 majority of both houses of the legislature, and now must be put before the voters to ratify by a simple majority. So I'm going to have to use the term amends the Constitution to, or a constitutional amendment that, and such phrases as that. Okay. So I'm going to go in reverse numerical order because the simple ones happen to be the higher number ones. So the first 2 are kind of simple and uncontroversial, and I hope I can dash through them and save our neuron capacity for the later, more complicated ones. So the first one is Prop 72. It's called the Rainwater Capture Property Tax Exclusion. It exempts rainwater capture systems from property tax assessments. The exemption starts January of next year and ends January 10 years later, 2029. The exemption applies only when the system is first installed, not when the building is subsequently sold. A rainwater capture system it could be something like just putting a rain barrel under your gutters or under your spouts and using the water to water your garden. It was referred to the voters by unanimous vote of the legislature. A constitutional amendment is required because it deals with property tax. And ever since the great California taxpayers' revolt of the late 1970s, that same revolt that brought us Prop 13, put property tax in the Constitution, and once something is in the Constitution, it cannot be changed except by another constitutional amendment. Fiscal effects are a minor reduction in local property tax revenues. The supporters are the California Democratic Party, the League of Voters of California, most conservation organizations, Save the Bay, Planning and Conservation League, and there is no published opposition. I guess I neglected to mention before I started that I will take questions, but at the end, after I've talked about everything. So there are, you can use the same cards that you use for the sheriff's candidate forum, and we have the ladies there waving the cards if you want to. But when you write out a question, please put the number of the measure that you're asking the question about as part of the title so I know what you're talking about. Okay, so on to the second one. This also is a simple and uncontroversial one. This is called the ballot measures effective date change, Prop 71 I'm talking about. It amends the Constitution to change the date on which state ballot measures take effect. So currently, a ballot measure that is approved by the voters takes effect on the next day, after Election Day. Prop 71 would move it to 5 days following certification by the Secretary of State. So currently, it takes about 37 days after Election Day for the Secretary of State to certify it. So this would move it 37 plus 5, 42 days on an average. And the reason, the motivation behind this is that primarily the increased use of mail-in ballots. Last general election, 58% of votes were cast by mail-in, and in addition, there's increased use of what are called provisional ballots. Provisional ballots are ballots issued to voters about whom there is some question of their eligibility. They show up at the polling booth and they're not on the registration rolls for whatever reason, some snafu, something. So they are issued in a provisional ballot. They can cast their vote that way. But both provisional ballots and mail-in ballots take more processing than the kind we're used to casting at the polls. And the upshot is it's becoming increasingly likely that the outcome of a close election will not be known by the end of Election Day. So that's the motivation behind this. It was referred to the voters by unanimous vote of the legislature. It has no effect on government finances. Supporters are the California Democratic Party, the League of Women Voters, the San Jose Mercury, the Sacramento Bee. What they say is that delaying enactment until certification ensures the true vote outcome is enacted, and that it's a minor technical adjustment passed unanimously by the legislature. And the only opponent I was able to find was one Gary Wesley, attorney at law. And he says Prop 71 is unnecessary because currently a measure may be retroactive from certification to the day after the election. And secondly, it opens the door for the legislature to delay certification. I guess in theory, the legislature could somehow interfere with the Secretary of State certification process. Okay, so those are the two simple, uncontroversial ones. And now we'll go on to Prop 70, which is my personal favorite. It's got some very interesting questions connected with it. The title is, it requires a one-time 2/3 vote to spend cap and trade revenue. And if you read what it does, it really doesn't make very much sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because it's part of a package, a legislative package, sort of a horse trading package between the legislature, between the parties in the legislature. And so this one is best explained with some background before I get into what it actually does. So we're talking about, all this is in reference to what's called a cap and trade extension. So a cap and trade, since California has had a cap and trade program in place, or I should say active, since 2012. And cap and trade is a system designed to reduce greenhouse gases. Under a cap and trade system, the state sells permits to emit greenhouse gas, specifically carbon dioxide. So every quarter, the state holds an auction, and those emitters, for example, a power company or a large manufacturer, comes to the state and say, we want to emit blah, blah, blah tons of carbon dioxide this quarter, and we'd like to purchase a permit for that, or actually bid on a permit. It's an auction. And then after the companies or entities, companies, whoever, do purchase their permits, they can trade them between themselves. So say, for example, a power company that's able to bring down its emissions less expensively than the other emitters can sell their permit to another company that's having more difficulty bringing down its greenhouse gas emissions. So the idea is sort of to create a market or a free market so that the system as a whole finds the least expensive way, the most cost-effective way to reduce greenhouse gases. So the intent of the overall point or goal of cap and trade is to reduce greenhouse gases, but it does have the side effect of raising revenue, significant revenue from the sale of these permits, about $5 billion so far. So the revenues themselves are intended to be spent on programs to reduce greenhouse gases at both the state and local levels. They can be spent, appropriated is the term of art, by simple majority vote in the legislature. The current program expires in 2020. Okay, there are two. This is one of the reasons this is interesting, because it really is kind of a fundamental breakdown or a dichotomy between people who really passionately believe in man-made climate change and those who are climate change skeptics. And there is a rough party breakdown along these lines, but it's not entire, it's not complete. There are some Democrats that are skeptical or do not look kindly upon cap and trade, a minority, but some. And likewise, on the other side, there are some Republicans, maybe most prominently former Governor Schwarzenegger, who do believe in man-made climate change and are willing to countenance some program to reduce it. But overall, there is a controversy that breaks down largely, but not entirely, along party lines. First of all, there is strong disagreement over some of the spending. Particularly, $8 million of cap and trade money was allocated to high-speed rail. And that is, as you probably know if you read the news, the governor is the most prominent and powerful champion of high-speed rail. And then there's kind of a more meta or long-range question also, and that is cap and trade a form of taxation? Are these permits taxation? Cap and trade is something new, and it doesn't quite fit into the old categories. If it is a form of taxation, if the courts were to, if it were taken to court and the courts were to agree, that means that a cap and trade extension is a tax bill, and so must be passed by 2/3 majority of the legislature. Okay, so now we get to the cap and trade. There was a bill passed. It's known as AB 398. It is the cap and trade extension. It extends cap and trade until the year 2030. It also lowers carbon dioxide, the target carbon dioxide level, quite a bit to 40% of 1990 levels, which means there's going to be a lot more revenue. I mean, from the point of view of Prop 70, there's going to be a lot more revenue coming in. So AB 398 was passed with a 2/3 majority. It was sort of a miracle of legislative horse trading. But they needed with the help of 8 Republican votes. So the 2/3 vote, I remind you, now removes any legal doubt that this is legal. Even if it were taken before the courts and judged to be a form of taxation, this is still good to go. But in exchange for those 8 Republican votes, the deal. In exchange for those votes, the Democrats agreed to put this proposition, Proposition 70, on the ballot. So now we can finally get to what it actually does. It amends the Constitution. What else? To sequester cap and trade revenue in a dedicated reserve fund starting in the year 2024. And then it requires a one-time 2/3 vote of the legislature to spend the accumulated money. Okay, so the idea here is to give Republicans and dissident Democrats a seat at the table. I think particularly the GOP wants a crack at high-speed rail, or at least the portion of cap and trade revenue that goes to high-speed rail. There is no deadline. The revenue accumulates in this reserve fund until a 2/3 majority can be mustered. Subsequent revenue after this initial 2/3 vote could be spent by a simple majority. Okay, this last point, this third point, it suspends certain manufacturer sales tax exemption. It's kind of like a chicken wing. It's a lot of extra work for very little more meat. There are certain taxes that the legislature allowed exemptions to manufacturers and agricultural interests. In other words, they didn't have to pay sales taxes for this kind of equipment. The equipment has to do with greenhouse gas reduction. So it doesn't amount to much. It's only a couple of $100 million. It's really kind of a minor footnote compared to the overall money at stake with the auction, with the permit revenue. But I guess they threw it in there because it gives the GOP some motivation to come to the table and negotiate and get this 2/3 majority, you know, to come to the, you know, just to not sit there. These sales tax exemptions will be suspended. They're suspending the suspension. So the upshot is they will have to pay the taxes until the 2/3 majority is mustered. Okay, so just to sum up, cap and trade extension itself is a done deal. Okay, we're not voting on that. We're just, the question before us is, how will the revenue be spent, or more exactly, how will the decision be made to spend the revenue? Do you want a two-thirds, that bottleneck, or that initial two-thirds majority to spend the money? If Prop 70 fails to pass, the situation continues as is. That is, greenhouse gas reduction, cap and trade revenue will be spent on greenhouse gas reduction programs by a simple majority. Okay, the fiscal effects are, it could change whether or not the two-thirds majority is mustered. It could change the mix of cap and trade funding to state and local programs starting in 2024. It might reduce the money available for greenhouse gas reduction if they are unable to muster that two-thirds majority. Potentially a temporary increase in the sales tax revenue starting in 2024 could range from $0 to a few $100 million annually. That's that manufacturer's tax I referred to earlier. The exemption will be suspended, so they'll have to pay it until the two-thirds majority is mustered. Okay, who's for it? Governor Brown, former Governor Schwarzenegger, Representative Chad Mays. Representative Mays was the leader of the Assembly Republicans, and he took the lead in negotiating this deal. The other Republicans removed him from his position over this. They were angry at this deal. The California Chamber of Commerce, the California State Firefighters Association. The supporters say that Prop 70 requires two-thirds of the legislature to agree that spending truly goes to greenhouse gas reduction, and it is part of a bipartisan effort to achieve our climate goals, retain jobs, and protect air quality and public health. Who's against it? The California Democratic Party, the Sierra Club, Coalition for Clean Air, the Chronicle, LA Times, Sacramento Bee, Tom Steyer is a prominent environmentalist, the League of Women Voters of California. So the environmentalist groups are kind of split on this. I would say the majority that I've seen are against it, but there are some for it. So the opponents say that the two-thirds vote is not achievable. Prop 70 undermines clean energy progress and empowers special interest. One gentleman from an environmentalist group said it makes sense for program allocations to be reviewed, but it should be done through the normal budget process. There's no valid reason for a two-thirds requirement. And surprisingly, there has been very little money raised either for or against this measure. There was no money raised in support as of the 5th of this month, and all of $1,185 raised in opposition. Okay. We'll go on to Prop 69. This is called the Transportation Revenue Lockbox. We're still talking about a constitutional amendment here. This also is best approached by going into the background first. There's two things you've got to know about. One is Senate Bill 1, and the other is the Gann limit. So I'll start talking about Senate Bill 1. Senate Bill 1, also known as the Road Repair and Accountability Act, was passed in April of last year, largely along party lines. It raises an estimated $5.2 billion a year by taxes on fuel and vehicle fees. Its intent is to finance transportation infrastructure repair and improvement. Also, it repays $760 million previously borrowed from transportation funds and used for other purposes. Okay, so now I go on to the second thing we should know about. There is something called the Gann limit. The Gann limit is a constitutional ceiling on state and local spending. It was put into the Constitution by voter initiative way back in 1979. It was part of the same great California taxpayers revolt that brought us Prop 13. And it has been modified quite a bit over the years, and it's kind of complicated, but the basic idea is that there is a per head ceiling on how much state and local governments combined can spend per head. And there are exceptions for education and transportation, as you'll see as I go along. But that's the overall idea. There is a limit, and it has to be, it's in the Constitution, and it has to be respected. In recent years, spending has approached the limit. Since the 1980s, the state and local governments have been pretty comfortably below the limit, but in recent years it's been getting up closer to it. So I think the last year, financial year 15-16, it got $6 billion below. The total budget, I should say, of the state is about $100 billion a year, roughly $100 billion a year. And it was about $6 billion below. So that's, a little uncomfortably close. Most transportation infrastructure spending is exempt from the Gann limit, but about $2 billion of the total $5 billion of Senate Bill 1 revenue is not exempt. Okay, so now we can get to what Prop 69 actually does. First, it exempts spending, all spending of, or I should say spending of all Senate Bill 1 revenue from the Gann limit, and it requires all Senate Bill 1 revenue to be spent on transportation. In other words, they will not repeat the sins of the past and borrow it and use it for other purposes. So in effect, the legislature is saying, please exempt this revenue from the Gann limit, and we swear at our mother's graves that it will be spent solely on transportation. It will have no direct effect on state or local revenues or costs because, remember, Senate Bill 1 is really a done deal. Senate Bill 1 did have effect, but that's a done deal. So, who's for it? Many California municipalities, in fact, all of them that went on record for supporting it, on record about it, the League of Women Voters, California Chamber of Commerce, California Association of Highway Patrolmen, California Business Roundtable, California State Association of Counties, Sacramento Bee, most newspapers. They say, supporters say, that California roads and other transport infrastructure are badly in need of repair and upgrade. Prop 69 ensures that Senate bill revenue can only be used for road and transportation with the priority on roads. Prop 69 does not raise taxes. Who's against it? Some staunch conservatives, Senator Moorlach and Assemblyman Frank Bigelow. They say a portion of the money is for transit, including high-speed rail and bike lanes, not roads. Proposition 69 effectively raises the cap on general fund spending. Both those are true statements. Campaign finance, there's been, as of, let's see, the 5th, $1,140,000 raised in support, and the top four donors are, you can see, League of California Cities, California Alliance for Jobs, County Supervisors Association, State Building and Construction Trades Council. So there's cities and there's also building trades unions that are supporting this measure. There's no money raised in opposition. Okay, so now I'm going on to the last state measure, and this is called the Parks, Environment, and Water Bond. It is not a constitutional amendment. It was referred to the voters by 2/3 of the legislature, almost completely along party lines. It authorizes the sale of $4 billion in new general obligation bonds. It repurposes $100 million in previously authorized but unsold bonds. And the intent is to finance or co-finance a wide variety of park, environmental, and water projects. You have to keep in mind that the projects have not yet been defined. You're not voting for particular projects here. You're voting for a pot of money to be used to finance or co-finance as yet to be proposed projects. There are 33 project areas or goals, each with a certain amount of money allocated to it. The largest single allocation is for parks for underserved communities. I'll hit some of the projects. Time doesn't allow going through all 33 areas, but I'll hit some of the highlights. Park and recreation areas, creation of, improvement of, deferred maintenance of, protection, restoration of wetlands, watersheds, coastal areas, rivers, aquifers, drought, fire hazard, and sea rise remediation, flood control, and clean drinking water. 15 to 20% of funds to go to communities whose median household income is less than 60% of the state average. So there really is, it does have the feel of something of a kitchen sink measure when you read it. There's a lot of different areas in there. And one can envision that a given project could fulfill multiple goals, and you can wonder how the state agency is going to sort all that out. So how will it be administered? The projects will be proposed and administered by local governments, regional and state agencies, and approved non-profits, for example, open space preserves. It will be vetted by various state agencies according to published criteria. So there's probably going to be a lot of preliminary work while the state agencies sort out what their criteria are and publish them. The approved projects will be publicized online and monitored by the Department of Natural Resources, monitored by a Citizens Advisory Committee, and audited by the Department of Finance. So the fiscal effects are, there will be the state will be making bond payments averaging about $200 million annually for 40 years. The total cost of principal plus interest is $7.8 billion. Total interest costs $3.8 billion. Just to put that in the context of total bond debt owed by the state, the total California general obligation infrastructure bond debt, and debt is sort of a complicated issue, but the bond debt, including Prop 68, would be about $87 billion. And California also has $36 billion in unsold bonds, which it could choose to sell at some point, which would include the bond debt. So currently, 5% of general fund spending, about $6 billion a year, goes to infrastructure bond debt service. And 0.2% of general fund spending would go to Prop 68 debt service. There would be savings to local governments, likely averaging several tens of millions of dollars annually for the next few decades, because the local governments wouldn't have to pay for their own projects. Who's for it? Governor Brown, Senator Kevin De Leon, Mayor Villarugosa, the California Democratic Party, the California Chamber of Commerce, Association of Water Agencies, Silicon Valley Leadership, Chronicles, SACB, most conservation and open space preserves, State Building, Construction, Trades and Council, and League of Women Voters. And they say California faces many environmental challenges: droughts, floods, wildfires, unpredictable weather, and several California communities lack local parks or tap access to clean drinking water. Prop 68 is a smart, bipartisan, locally controlled approach to tackling these challenges. The opponents are, the registered opponents are Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the Central Coast Taxpayers Association, and the same Senator John Moorlach that commented on Prop 70. They say only $1.3 billion of Prop 68 money goes for improving parks. They say California has too much debt as it is: pensions, retiree, medical liabilities, school debt, veterans benefits, affordable housing are squeezing out other programs. Bonds should not pay for deferred maintenance and other types of projects that are short-term in nature. The money is not distributed fairly. Many inland and rural communities will not receive Prop 68 park bond money. So as of a few days ago, a total of almost $5 million has been raised in support, and you can see the top 5 donors. They're all conservation organizations or individuals. There are no committees registered in opposition. Okay, so that concludes the state measures. And now we'll go on to the regional measure. Regional Measure 3, the Bay Area Traffic Relief Plan. So the background is, it was instigated in the state legislature by our own Senator James Bill. It was placed on the 9 Bay Area county ballots by the Bay Area Toll Authority, BATA, which is an agency of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is a Bay Area agency charged with financing, coordinating, overseeing, sometimes designing transportation projects. It passes with a majority vote of the 9 counties. So it finances what's called the Bay Area Traffic Relief Plan. And it finances them by toll raises on the 7 state-owned bay bridges. That is, all of the bridges except the Golden Gate Bridge. It will increase the tolls 3 times in $1 increments, starting in 2019 and ending in 2025. And the money will be spent on, unlike the Prop 68, the water parks bond issue, the projects here are defined. They're defined and specific. They know just what exactly they want to do with this money. So there's 35 defined projects and programs designed to reduce road congestion. There will be $4.5 billion in highway and transit capital projects. That means, I guess, that they must intend to use the revenue stream from the bridges for a bond issue to raise that lump sum. And then $60 million a year to ongoing programs. So this is sort of an overall big picture sort of allocation, how the money is going to be spent. 69% on mass transit, 25% on roads, multimodal 3%, bike pedestrian 3%. And this is how the benefits, they figure the benefits, and I'm not exactly sure how they measured that, but probably that's how much they think your drive time will be improved or how much of the total improvement of drive time will be allocated by county. And it matches pretty closely to bridge usage. For, you know, Alameda County, people who live in Alameda County account for 32% of bridge usage, for example. So I'll just give you, I can't go, this is another one, it's too many items and it's too complicated, and it's really worthwhile. I'll give you some sources later on to dive into the details, but I'll give you some highlights of what the traffic relief plan does. It replaces BART's obsolete rail cars and expands the fleet by 300 new cars, and BART thinks that will increase capacity by 30%. Will help extend BART to San Jose and Santa Clara. It will electrify Caltrain and extend it to the Trans-Bay Terminal, expand ferry service, expand regional express bus service, implement a next-generation Clipper transit fare payment system. So in theory, we could have a card and just use it for all kinds of public transportation all around the Bay Area, wherever we go, bridges, ferries, BART, whatever, we just wave our card and it lets us through. It implements variable toll lanes, redesigns some freeway interchanges, builds direct links between freeways, accelerates planning for a second Trans-Bay rail crossing, but that, don't hold your breath for that one, it's going to be hugely expensive. So each fiscal effects are each $1 toll increase will generate about $125 million per year, and when all three are implemented, it'll be $375 million a year. Oversight, there'll be an oversight committee made of 2 representatives appointed by the Board of Supervisors in each of the 9 counties. Oops. Expenditures subject to annual audit. BATA is required to submit annual reports on plan status to the legislature. I guess I just want to pause, and there's a little bit of a reflection, sort of a meta reflection, that there's more and more issues or more problems we're encountering have to be dealt at the Bay Area level. Transportation is one of them. No single city or county can do much about transportation, so there is an increasing need for Bay Area regional action on this. And there is no, a gentleman at one of my previous talks asked a good question. He said, wasn't there a better way to raise the revenue, or why did they settle on the bridge tolls? And my answer wasn't very good. I didn't, you know, I kind of thought about it afterwards, and it's because there is no agency or entity that has a general taxing authority over the Bay Area. They might have seized on the bridge tolls simply because there's a mechanism for raising bridge tolls, the BATA. They do have the authority to raise them. But there is no, like when they built BART, they had to dicker with each individual county, and it was a huge, long, lengthy mess. Each individual county had to decide and vote. So just sort of a little meta reflection there. Sorry, it might be a digression. Yes, thank you. So who supports back to Regional Measure 3, back to Earth, back to our immediate question? The Bay Area Council, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, the SPUR, San Francisco Bay Area Planning and Urban Research Association. You see their name crop up in nearly every regional issue. The Mercury News, the San Francisco Chronicle. And they say the Bay Area drive, well, we all know, the drive times are the highest on record, and if we do nothing, it's only going to get worse. RM3 finances a package of projects designed to reduce the number of cars on the road and ease bottlenecks. Most commuters, bridge commuters, can afford the toll increases. Some feel that point is debatable. The Clipper card upgrades will allow the Bay Area transit authorities to coordinate income-based fare discounts. So the only group I found online that is against this is something called the Transportation Solutions Defense and Education Fund. They say, sort of the counterpoint to what one of the supporters points, higher tolls are a burden on low-income drivers who can't live close to their workplace. I guess you could argue, well, so is increasing. If they have to commute 2 hours a day, that's a toll also. In the past, many transit project funds have been diverted for other purposes. There are no clear procedural documents detailing how RM3 funds will be received and administered. They say also, opponents also say, converting HOV lanes to toll lanes encourages single occupant driving. And this last point was posted by a guy who's generally in favor of Regional Measure 3, but he says it's heavily loaded with highway expansion projects, which will likely end up worsening congestion on the bridge corridors. So of all the measures, I think this last one will probably have the most tangible and practical effects on our lives, and I really encourage you guys to dive into the details of the individual projects, how it will affect your individual driving patterns, or maybe how much driving could be eliminated from your life. And I have some online sources of info here, and down at the bottom there's information you can go to for the Bay Area measure. One is the Santa Clara County Voter Info Guide. They have a good thing on RM3. They have all the projects detailed out and nice charts about drive times over the years and bridge usage and good stuff like that. Something to warm the hearts of engineer types. And also the MTC has a good publication. And the URL was too long for me to fit on, so you just have, if you Google RM _3 _ ballot _ description and look for something by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, you'll come to that report. And then there are these other sources. So I'll just leave this up here. Did anybody write any questions? Okay. This is a good question, and unfortunately, I won't be able to answer it. Whoever said County Supervisor Joe Simitian opposes RM3. The Cupertino City Council voted to oppose it. What other cities in Santa Clara County oppose it, and do you know the reasons why? And I am embarrassed to say I do not know. Will electrifying Caltrains reduce noise pollution? And I'm not an engineer, and I really can't say with authority, but I would guess that it does. Yeah, I mean, electrification generally is quieter than an internal combustion engine. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't go into the details of the engineering or the design of these projects. This question asked me, why are there no express lanes on 101 and 280 during rush hour? But I think I can say that there will be there. That's part of the plan. I think they're going to put toll lanes on just about all the major freeways, as I recall from the map. Okay, but that's one you should look at the Santa Clara Voter Information Guide. Let's see, on Prop 68, how difficult is the alternative of raising tolls to generate the funds for the same project? Well, that's the question. It's a good question, and I think they would be very difficult at this point. As I say, there is no Bay Area regional entity or governmental that has the authority to go before the voters for a general tax. They've done it county by county, as they did when they built BART. They've done it BART's sales taxes. They've raised some revenue that way. And it so happens that this one might not be too bad a shot, too bad a way of raising the money, because it really does raise money from the people who will benefit from the projects. And that's the Bay Area tolls. I mean the bridge tolls. I guess you could argue the people that don't use the bridges very much, but still use the, maybe they're getting a bit of a free ride here. That's true. But I think that's maybe, given what they had available, maybe the best way they could think of to raise the money for these transportation improvements, which I think are generally agreed to be very badly needed. I think this falls under the category of self-help. Sometimes the state just isn't able to step in and help with transportation, or there's other areas where this is true, and the Bay Area just decided, man, we've got to do it, some of this on our own. We can't. We've got to pay for a lot of this ourselves, and I think that is the best they could do for this particular situation. Okay, let's see. Prop 70. What has Governor Brown said why he favors the proposition? Well, Governor Brown feels very strongly about climate change, and he gave up. He was willing to give up. He feels strongly about climate change, and he feels strongly about high-speed rail. And he gave up something for this deal. He's giving, in effect, he's giving the Republican Party a crack at high-speed rail. I mean, maybe not a great high percentage crack, but he is giving him a chance. He is giving him a seat at the table, if Prop 70 passes, of eliminating it from at least greenhouse gas revenue funding. So, Dorothy, did I answer your question? Where's Dorothy? Okay. Tangential, okay, I already asked that. Okay. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Oh, here's some more. Okay. One more question. Prop 71. Is there any movement to make mail-in ballot counting faster? Well, there's, yes, there is. There's a new thing where I think some of the counties have already implemented, and I forget the name of it, but instead of having polling places, they'll have centers where people can drop off the their mail-in ballots and distributed, and so they think it will speed up the process. Gosh, I can't remember the name of that program. But the answer to your question is yes. They are the Voters' Choice Act. Okay. But there was another name. Okay. Yes. Okay. Any more? Oh man, look at that. Is that punctuality or what? 1 minute after 9. Okay. Thank you for listening. Thank you. And on behalf of the League of Women Voters, may I say how much we appreciate you taking the time to be good voters. That's what makes us feel good. Okay. Thank you again.